Welcome to this episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. I'm Paula Eddy Wilcox, and I'm delighted to welcome our guests for the second time, where we're looking at their take on the game and leadership aspect of the podcast. Who knows what we might find out, because we all look at this differently, and it's always so interesting to see what the guests have in store for me when I turn up, because we never plan this in advance. So I hope you're as excited as me. Let's get into it, and I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to the latest episode of Game of Leadership podcast, and we are joined again by Amy Avergun for her second episode. Glutton for punishment, I think, coming back a second time. Yes. But it's an absolute pleasure to see you again. Thank you, Amy. Once again, just to remind folks, you are an instructional designer by trade, and have been doing it for a number of years to great success, helping others to create great training, great workshops, great courses. And I know you've been fantastic support to me on some of the things that I've been fortunate enough to create over the last few years, and I'm super grateful for that. And one thing I've learned about working with you, Amy, is that you naturally bring the most fantastic and unique way of looking at things. So what I know is that you'll read something or you'll experience something, and then, I don't know how long later, an hour later, maybe the next morning, but something's percolated in the mind and something fantastically unique emerges as a result that I would never even think of. So I am really excited today that in today's episode, we're going to be having a look at the game side of leadership. But I know that this won't necessarily be a game that we play, or, in its truest sense. You're going to bring a bit of a unique perspective to it. So with that, welcome to the show. And what are we talking about today, Amy?
Well, what are we talking about today? It's they say about salespeople, it's always about whoever the last customer was that they talk to. Yeah. With me, it's always about what's the last book that I read, and what idea came out of that. And that's what I like to do. There's so many unbelievable books that have come out. And if people are interested, Adam Grant, who is a professor at Wharton, is wonderful about coming up with, here's the 20 books that you may want to read this spring.
Right.
And the thing is, I don't know how he does it, but I don't know if he reads all of them, but he seems to, and he's the one that always on the endorsement, he'll have some little thing. But I have found that whatever it is he likes about books, I have a similar thing. So I utilize him a lot as a starting point on what am I going to read next. And then I have this other friend, Larry, who's a lawyer who I met in a positive psychology course, who he also is an avid reader. And so we're like in our own little mini book club. So if I'm trying to decide what to read, I reach out to Larry and he'll say, yeah, that's a good one. No, don't bother with that one, whatever. So that's my way of saying that I just love reading all this stuff and then thinking about who does it apply to, or how can I use it, or it just pops up. So just yesterday, I was talking with a client of mine who is, she wrote a book and she developed an assessment, and now she is working on a training course to teach people the best way to utilize the book and the instrument. Right. And it's really a great item. But the book that I was reading, though, brought something to mind. I had watched her do a pilot of the training course. And what struck me was that we really want people to use this instrument and apply this. And when we have something new, we have an innovation, we have something that's just coming out,
Mm.
If somebody says, well, what's good about it? We start listing off the benefits. Well, it's going to do this for you. It's going to do that for you. It's going to, change your life, whatever. Well, I just recently read a book called The Human Element, which talks about what really gets in the way of people adopting innovations.
Mm.
And what they have talked about is it's not about listing all the benefits. The minute you're put on the spot, you start saying, well, if you listen to my podcast, here's the 6 things that are going to change in your life. It's really about thinking about what's in the way of people listening to your podcast. And they call it friction. They say, what's the friction that's involved in people adopting? So in the case of the client that I was talking to yesterday, what's the friction in people using this instrument and then having meaningful conversations with their direct reports about it? And so that really got us thinking in a whole other direction.
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you, Paula, is if you think about something that you really want people to adapt or adopt, you can name what the benefits are. Like you have your model, right?
Yeah.
That you like to use. So let's think for a minute about what is some of the friction that is in the way of people just sort of jumping in with both feet and utilizing it. What can you do to make it, I like the term frictionless for people?
Yeah, I love that idea of frictionless, Amy, and a great way to think about things. And I have a framework that I created a few years ago now called Realization to Results, and it's the 5 R's that help people go through this process of starting off thinking about realizing they need some help and support and that something needs to change, and then getting to the results in the end that they really want. And they go through some refocusing, recalibrating through that too, within the process. And you're absolutely right. We're all guilty of this. We all make all sorts of excuses as to why we can't go and get that support. Or perhaps we're even in denial that we need any help. We can do this on our own, But often you'll find that you're in some sort of cycle of trying to, I like the term, hoover up as much information as you can, or vacuum for our US audience as much.
No, Hoover is a
works for you
here.
too. Good.
Yes.
Excellent. And trying to absorb as much as you can, but then not having the know-how to utilize all of that information and turn it into something useful for you. So that's where coaches like you and me come into the picture, because we're able to help you translate all of that information into, well, what does that really mean for me? And how do I then make that my reality? What is it that I want to get at the end of that? And how am I going to get there? And okay, great, Amy and Paul are going to help me do that. Fantastic. So, before we even get in front of somebody, there's all sorts of, we could say excuses, I guess, where they say, well, I haven't got enough time to do that, or haven't got the budget to do that bit of training that would really make a difference for my team, but it's just not a priority right now because there's 20 other priorities that we must pay attention to. There's all sorts of stuff. So that idea of taking away those frictions, and really doing a deep dive with your team or with yourself, as to, okay, what's in the way? What, in coaching we call it, what are the blockers here? What's going to stop you from getting to where you want to be? They're the things that need to be removed before you can then move forwards. And it's a really lovely way to look at it, because often you'll find in the sort of social media circus, if we want to call it like that, you know, when you're seeing everybody and sort of selling their courses or their training, or you must do this because your life will be so much better for it.
Right.
All of these things that are out there, you know, they are all sharing the benefits to you. But actually,
exactly.
what's in the way of you
Yes.
doing this and having this, or getting what you want, whatever it might be, the end question for you?
So, you know, it's interesting because what you just described brings up another, I don't know, sort of nugget that I have come across. And that is, when people give you all the reasons why they can't do something, we can sometimes feel very discouraged by hearing no.
Yeah.
And there is a book, I believe it's called Never Split the Difference, written by Chris Voss, V-O-S-S, who was an FBI hostage negotiator, who you can imagine heard a lot of no's from the hostage takers, right?
Yeah.
And what he says in this book, and it's really kind of a fascinating book, is no is good. When you hear no in the beginning, it's actually a very good thing. You almost want to pose a question to hear no. And the reason is that once somebody says no to you, it makes them feel like they're in control, and it takes them off the defensive, and it sort of counterintuitively opens them up. So I was thinking about what you just described in terms of a client saying, well, I don't have the time to do that, or it's not a priority. So you hear that's basically them saying no, but doesn't that open it up to, well, what would make it a priority?
Yeah.
Under what circumstances would it be a priority for you? And how, you know, and that leads me to one of my other things that I love to do with people is, can we do a little experiment? Trying to nudge people. So many, this is true of a lot of my clients, they feel like it has to be perfect on round one. And the company that I worked for, we had what I would call a pilot mentality, which was we just knew that we were going to try out each module at least 5 times, and that we had a motto that there's no such thing as an unsuccessful pilot, because you always learn something. And this saying came up. I remember where I was when it came up. I was in the coffee room, the break room, and the VP of product development came into the break room, really nice man. And he knew I had just come back from a pilot that we had done, you know, somewhere out of state. And he said, well, how did the pilot go? And, you know, it really hadn't gone particularly well, truth be told. But, you know, I said, so I paused for a minute and I just looked at him and I said, you know, Ed, there really is no such thing as an unsuccessful pilot, because we always learn something. And he said, you know, you're absolutely right. And it was like, from then on, I think I went back and I just said to my team, well, we have, you know, and it was true, because we would have things like we were in California, we'd fly across country. We would have told the client that we needed, you know, managers who had, you know, at least 6 direct reports. And then we'd get there and the room would be filled with HR people who had no direct reports, you know, and it would be like, oh my God, we just flew across country. But then we would learn something, you know, we would go ahead and deliver the training. And then at the end, we would say, you know, it was kind of serendipitous that we did this, because here's what came out of that. So I kind of learned that was really true, even though it was one of those spontaneous things. And I'll tell you, there is nothing more freeing than feeling like you do not have to nail it on the first attempt. Knowing that you are trying something, that your audience knows you're trying something, and you just go with it and you learn from it. It's when you think that you have to have it perfect,
Mm.
that, I think that's when you freeze. That's when it's stressful, and that's when it's not good. So I applaud you. For example, this podcast thing is a grand experiment, right?
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely, Amy. Who knows if
Who knows?
we're interesting? I like to hope we're interesting and that people will want to
Yeah.
listen. And I could I know lots of friends who have in the podcasting world who take pride in super crisp audio and all of that great stuff that makes the production side of it so superb. For me, this is really about being real. And the recordings that I've done to date, there's been something that's gone off in the background, either in the house or I've got a dog. The dog will be barking, or my daughter will bang the door next door, or someone I'm talking to, something will happen. But for me, that's all about the reality of our lives. And I don't want to try and cut out that kind of normalness, if you like.
Right. The human, and I don't know about you, but I find the podcasts where people are relaxed so much more enjoyable.
Yes.
I just, and I also feel like there's something very organic. And so ideas just sort of, kind of come out. Like, I think that's why I like the podcast, the Scott Barry Kaufman one, because he's a really brilliant guy. He's read, a ton of things. He's done so much research. Whoever he's talking to, you can kind of see the light go off in his head, and he'll say, well, wait a minute, that reminds me of this. And then the other person goes, yeah, that is, great that you brought that up, because here's the other part of it. And it's just fascinating to watch the kind of the sparks go off.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's when I feel the most comfortable. I'm enjoying doing this much more than I am, a workshop where we have an hour, and okay, I have to make sure that we have this much time in this breakout room, and all of that kind of stuff. It's not nearly the fun of these, podcasts. So anyway, so then I have one last one. Do you want one last?
Or I'd love one last
thing?
Amy nugget, please.
Okay, here's my favorite one. And this seems to be a favorite with everybody. And you know about this one. Ooh, it is my ridiculously small step. So yesterday I was working with my trainer, and she was telling me that she was doing a presentation today on, what did she call it? Gut health.
Gut health, yes.
Yes. Okay. And so she was saying she loves doing this. And so I was asking her, well, what do you want people to do at the end? Like, what would be a good outcome for you? And she, told me that maybe they would call her or whatever. And I said, well, what I've been doing at the end of all of my workshops is I explain to people that I'm the queen of small steps, that I think that, we overwhelm our brains by asking, we set these big goals, we all know, think New Year's resolution, and then we never do them. And that what you want to do is identify small steps that are going to get you the outcome you want. And now I've gone even smaller, and I ask people to identify ridiculously small steps. And an example of that, which I give, is I like to take a walk every single day. Some days I'm not as motivated as I could be. So what I have found is a ridiculously small step that helps me is I put my sneakers on my dresser, so I don't even have to bend down, and I put my sneaker socks right inside those sneakers. And that way, first of all, I walk by them, who knows how many times, but it's just so easy. I just have to lift them right off, sit down on my bed, and put on my shoes. And what I've taken to doing now, sometimes when I do workshops, is I took a picture of those sneakers, with the sneaker socks, and I show people the slide with that. But people really like this concept of identifying a ridiculously small step. So to my trainer, I said to her, ask them to identify a ridiculously small step. Like, instead of calling you, maybe it's just putting in their phone to call you, or maybe it's to go to your website and spend 2 minutes looking at the stuff. Because the trick with the ridiculously small step is that dopamine is produced in your brain when you complete that ridiculously small step, same as when you do something else. And dopamine is great for, the first 2 letters of dopamine are DO, and I kind of call it the do drug, because it gets us doing things. And what we want to do is we want to start a snowball effect, a ripple effect of, we do one thing, okay, I feel good, I got some dopamine in my brain, now I'm going to do the next thing. Now I'm going to do the next thing. So anyway, and I call it RSS, ridiculously small steps. And I have kind of shared this with a lot of my coaching friends, and people now, when I do workshops, kind of know that it's my signature thing. On the depressing side, when I've taught people about instructional design, it seems like I might do an hour workshop. The only thing they remember is RSS. So, because again, I think our brains are on overload. And so it's kind of funny because, as much as we think we have all this great stuff to share, in the end, what I'm finding is people can remember 1 or 2 things, and that's it. And that's that's part of the instructional design thing, is what's one thing that I would like people to walk away with. And if they just walk away with the RSS, you know what? I'm happy.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my, those are kind of my tips du jour, I guess I would call them. Okay.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That might have to be a little feature on the show. Tips du jour.
Tips du jour. Yes. Yes.
Oh, Amy, so brilliant. And yes, I do know about the ridiculously small steps, and I did ask for permission to use that with my clients back when we were talking about that together. And it works so beautifully. We spend so much time focusing on the one thing that didn't go well out of this amazing piece of work or project or program that we delivered, that we forget all the little tiny, ridiculously small steps that it took, that we nailed on the way to getting to where we then were able to deliver that piece of work or whatever it is, and celebrate those wins along the way. And I often add to that, so ridiculously small because you can't help but succeed.
Exactly.
It really. Yeah. So, then you get to celebrate those little tiny wins. And as you say, the dopamine kicks in because we're then getting happiness from it. And all of that. You're making me think about the professor of happiness that you talked about previously, which, I feel like I need that job in my life. But anyway, what a wonderful, wonderful chat with you again today. Thank you so much, Amy.
You're welcome.
You always share so much value. And, the beauty of the podcast is they don't have to remember just one thing today. They can rewind and listen again.
Right.
So they can pick up on all the fantastic things that you've shared there today. Thank you so much. And just to say that we are so lucky that Amy will be joining us for a 3rd episode of Game of Leadership. So we will see you next week, Amy. Thank you so much, as always, for your fantastic wisdom. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. I always think the game episode is one of my favourites because we get a real insight to our guest's take on their ideas of how games and leadership fit together. Every one of them is different, and just when I think there isn't another take that we haven't thought of or covered, one of our guests comes up with something totally different and unique. It's really exciting. Look, now it's your turn. See what you think, see what resonated with you most, and as always, I encourage you to reflect on what you've heard and see what that might mean for your leadership moving forwards. I'm Paula Eddie Wilcox, and this is Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. I really look forward to seeing you all next week. Bye for now.